Why are we developing this Healthy Pastor Network, Arden? It's to create a community where they can open up and be safe, where they can come and receive teaching to strengthen them so they'll finish well.
Welcome to the Healthy Pastors Podcast. I'm your host, Arden Bevere.
And I'm so glad to be with you here, Arden.
I'm joined with my dad, John Bevere, of course. And we're so excited because this is a brand new podcast.
It is, Arden. I'm so excited about it because we're talking to leaders who are leading people.
Yes, exactly.
And they're some of my favorite people on the planet as pastors. I just love them so much.
Yeah, and I've traveled with you for so many years and listened to the conversations that you've had with pastors. And so I'm excited that I get to ask you questions that I've heard you engage in conversations, heard wisdom from other pastors, and jump into it because we really believe in pastors. We want to see them finish well. We want to see them not become a statistic or anything else like that. And so I want to just jump into this because I think probably a lot of people right off the bat are going to be asking questions of, John, you are a traveling minister. You're not a pastor. So why do you feel qualified to do a pastor's podcast?
I think that, Arden, I agree. That one needs to be answered up front right away. And, you know, our whole team, and especially you, has helped me to see why. Because I asked myself that question from the beginning. And Arden, having traveled now for 35 years, I mean, Lisa and I have been in full-time ministry 4 decades. But having been in full-time or traveling ministry for 35 years, I've gotten to go to over 1,000 churches in the United States.
I would say it's more, right?
It probably is. I'm doing a conservative number. Right. But do you know what every one of those churches, you know I have a policy that I tell my assistant, every church I go to, I have to have at least one meal with that pastor. All right. So now that's over 1,000 meals and well over 1,000 because many of those trips I was 3 or 4 meals, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That I've sat across the table looking at a pastor, at his wife, or her husband, whatever the situation was, and really hearing their hearts. Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, I've told Lisa and our team, that's where the real ministry is. Sometimes I think I go to a city not just to speak to those 2,000 people in that auditorium, but it's that lunch that I have with the pastor afterwards. And after sitting and hearing and listening, I feel like God has given me a 36,000-foot view of where we're at right now as a church. The other advantage I have is that in all of these travels, I have met men and women in ministry that have pastored, that have been in ministry now for 3 decades, 4 decades, even one that's 5 decades as a pastor, and he still has the energy of a 35-year-old.
I would say so.
Okay? And so what I've done is you and I, we've brought these guys together and said, would you be on a team and let's reach out to the pastors in America? Mm-hmm. Now, the next natural question, I think, is why do you want to reach out to the pastors of America, right? Uh-huh. And that's because in 2022, my heart was broken because I started researching the condition, the spiritual, the social, financial condition of our pastors in the United States, and it's heartbreaking. Yeah. We have found out, and help me with these statistics, okay? Yeah. But Barna has done studies, other groups have done studies. 38% of the pastors are considering leaving the ministry in 2023.
Yeah, and that's compared to 29% the year prior. So that's jumped up significantly in just
29% in 1 year to 38%.
Yeah.
Now, 38%, let's be realistic here. That's 4 out of every 10 pastors. Mm-hmm. Are considering leaving the ministry in the United States.
But then also like thinking about the repercussion of that. 4 out of every 10 pastors, you understand how many of those pastors, those 4 pastors, people that they lead. So the repercussions of it is very significant.
So ministry spiritual.
Yeah.
So that we got 4 out of every 10 pastors walking into a pulpit on Sunday morning, and they really don't want to be there. Mm-hmm. And they don't have that unction, that oomph, because I wish here's what a lot of them said in the surveys. If I could do another job, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, and this is partially why, is it's 90% of pastors are reporting that they're working 55 to 75 hours a week. Yep. 50% of them feel like they're unable to meet the demand. 70% of pastors are fighting depression, of navigating those
70%.
70%.
Oh my goodness.
80% believe that pastoral ministry has a negative effect on their family.
We also have learned that 50% of the pastors will not survive 5 years.
Yeah.
We've also learned that 1 out of every 10 people who enter into full-time ministry will finish in full-time ministry.
Yeah.
That means 9 out of 10 will not finish.
Yeah. Well, and then here's what we're trying to do, because I don't want to just say all these statistics and be like, whoa, pastors really need help. Like, we got to understand, pastors are under attack because you are a threat to the enemy. Like Lisa always talks about this. If there's a target on the back, on your back, it is because the enemy would not attack someone who he's not threatened by. And so understanding
who he's not threatened by,
yeah,
right?
who the enemy's not threatened by.
I want to add to that. It's because all the people that person leads.
Exactly.
The enemy wants to go after the leader so he can affect everybody under the leader.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're not,
Lisa and I, our pastor, our very first pastor, he had one of the best known churches in America.
Yeah.
We had over 8,000 people in our congregation. In 1980s, that was mega big, right? Well, when he fell from ministry and basically he divorced his wife and married a younger woman, and his congregation went from over 8,000 to 1,600 down to 400 in just a matter of months. I went back to the city later, and I remember ministering in a church down the street. Now, this church no longer exists. Doors are closed. And I'm down the street, and there's a lot of the people who were in the church with me. Arden, they look like spiritual zombies. In other words, they still love God. They still wanted to go to heaven. They still wanted to serve God in some capacity. But they lost their fire. They lost their passion. They lost their zeal. They didn't have that great faith they previously had, where they were believing God for big accomplishments in the kingdom. They were just, I called them, I came back home and I said, Lisa, I felt like they were spiritual zombies. Now, that is why there's a target on these pastors' back.
Yeah.
Is because if he can get you, he can get everybody in your congregation. He's going to affect them in a certain way.
Yeah. And that's why we're having these conversations. That's
Correct.
why we're doing everything we do. We did not just start a podcast, but we also created a community, which I think the important thing about this community is we understand, look, we can get you a lot of information, but at the end of the day, it's just information. What we want to do is connect you with other people.
Yes.
We want to connect you with other pastors who are navigating similar challenges, navigating things that are, oh, that could be really effective in my church, that you get to hear from and connect with when you're also hearing from these, established leaders that have done it really well. And so our hope with this community is it's not just going to be a resource center for you, but it is going to be something that is going to connect you with other pastors that are going to come and lift you at a higher level and degree in your ministry and everything that has been appointed to you.
Now, Arden, correct me if I'm wrong, because I need to be, but aren't we going to try to connect leaders that have similar situations? Like, in other words, if a leader's got 2,500 people in his church and you got another leader that's got 200 in his church, I think they're going to be facing different challenges. Aren't we going to try to put the ones that may be like 500 or less together just so they can understand and relate to? Now, I'm seeing a look right now. Is this making it too complex for you?
We would love to. I think getting off
that's
from
the ultimate goal.
That's the ultimate. Yeah,
right.
That's the ultimate goal. And then being strategic of the people that we put in front of you. Like also having pastors who come and who have pastored a member church of 200 and have done it really, really well for years and years, and for being able to glean from that, because ultimately sometimes people just equate within being a pastor of how many people do I have in my church? Like that's always like the progression of questions you get is what do you do? I'm a pastor. Oh, great. How many people are in your church, or how big is your church? It's like your identity can be wrapped up so much in how many people show up. But the reality of it is there's people who are out there that have 100-member church, 200-member church, that their church is healthy, strong.
Yes,
it's
that's
growing.
what's important.
Yes, exactly.
But, and to add to that, before I was 50 years old, I was always going to a church and I'd think, oh my goodness, wow, look, there's 2,500 people here this morning. This guy's really doing well, right? Boy, did that change after 50. I mean, for the last 15 years now, it's been, I go into a church and the first thing I look at is how healthy is the wife? How healthy is his children? Because that to me is the greatest level or measure of success. I mean, it's like Paul said, if you can't take care of your own family, how do you take care of the household of God? And that's for another time, and we'll do that on another podcast. But we want to keep these pastors healthy because, look, if you have on your plate 55 to 75 hours of work a week, you're going to get depressed because you're not getting any family time. Your quiet time with God is going down. Mm-hmm. And Arden, I'm just going to say this right up front, the number one thing I see okay? Because I have sat across the table with so many pastors, okay? So many pastors. Well, John, I'm transitioning my church. And I go, wait. How old are you? 50, 57? Wait a minute. Whoa, wait. When are you doing this? Oh, I'd like to get it done in the next year. Oh, so I keep drilling down.
Yeah.
And you know what I get to? I'm tired. Okay, and I went, whoa, wait a minute. This is a spiritual thing. You say you're tired, but this is spiritual. Things aren't in line, or maybe they're dealing with forces that they're not recognizing. I'm going to go back to when I first started ministry. I'm so thankful for this prophet of God who gave my wife a word. And I mean, he was from the back hills of Arkansas, and he looks at my wife and says, you tell your husband I have a word from heaven for him. Now, you have to understand, I had words from people on and on and on and on. And I mean, if I recorded all the words that I've received in the past 40 years, I think I would get a major volume, a major book of words. But there are a few words, and it's only about 5 or 6 or 7, that I knew were straight from heaven. And this was one of them. He says, you tell your husband that if he doesn't walk in his God-given authority, that somebody else will take it away from him and use it against him. Now, I'm thinking he's talking about, oh, you better stay in your authority with your staff, or if I was going to be a pastor, with your church members. I didn't realize he was talking about spiritually. Because that next 7 years, I fought depression. I fought discouragement so strong that I wanted to leave ministry. I wanted to get out, but my heart wouldn't let me because I love God too much. But I was so discouraged. And I remember, I'm going back to when I was sitting in a hotel room in the first 7 years of ministry. Arden, I stared at a spot, and I didn't realize I was doing it. I was so depressed. I stared at a spot on a wall for 20 minutes, over 20 minutes. No. And the thoughts that were going through my mind were, why are you in ministry? Why are you leaving your wife and children? You're not doing anybody any good at all. Who do you think you are? And I remember just all of a sudden shaking myself out of it, but yet it was a reoccurring thing. And that day, God showed me how Elijah had this great day of ministry. I mean, he confronted a nation, 850 false prophets. He confronted the king.
Called down fire from heaven.
Called down fire, and it licked everything up, right? But the next day, that queen, who has a massive spirit of intimidation, says, I'm going to kill you by this time tomorrow. Yeah. And what does he do? He runs for his life. He goes all the way through Israel to the southern city of Beersheba, leaves a servant, walks a day further into the wilderness, sits under a tree and says, God, I want to die. He's confused. He's depressed. He's hopeless. He's lost his vision. Do you know how many pastors are out there? They're confused. They're depressed. They're hopeless. They've lost their vision. That was me that first 7 years. And I'm sitting there thinking, what's wrong with me? Before I got saved, I never was depressed. Before I got saved, I was never discouraged. Why am I so discouraged? Why am I fighting? And I didn't understand it was a spiritual thing. I'm dealing with it thinking, what's wrong with me emotionally? And so, Arden, I remember that day God showed me how Elijah had come under a spirit of intimidation. And what God showed me that really changed my life is the symptoms were confusion, depression, hopelessness, discouragement, all right? Why do you think God says to Joshua 7 times, be strong and of good courage? What's the opposite of courage? Discouragement. God is saying, Joshua, you're going to be a leader. You're going to have a whole nation under you. My inheritance is going to be under you. There's a target on your back. Yeah. Don't fight. Don't let discouragement in your soul, right? So I'm looking at that spot and I went, oh my goodness. And I remember I started addressing a spirit of intimidation because that pastor had told me one of the prominent members of his church was very upset with my message. And instead of addressing it in the spirit, I just came under it. And we know there are pastors out there, and you don't even realize it because this isolation occurs. And that's what I did, Arden. I isolated. I tried to figure this out on my own. I didn't want to tell. I'm a young minister. I'm 35 years old. I don't want to tell somebody I'm discouraged. I don't want to tell somebody I'm depressed. I don't want to tell anybody that I've lost my vision. I don't want to tell anybody that I'm praying and God's not even talking to me. The heavens were brass. God, and I was like, what's going on? I was confessing every sin I could think of. And all of a sudden I realized this is a spirit. And that spirit has caused a heaviness to come on me. And when I addressed it, I got free. And I even wrote a book on it. And so many pastors have said that it's helped them. But What I'm saying is it's too easy when you're a leader to isolate. And you may have tons of people around you. You may have people on your staff, but that isolation occurs in our soul. And the Bible says in Proverbs 18:1, a man who isolates himself, a man or woman who isolates himself, seeks their own desire and rages against all wise judgment. Why are we developing this Healthy Pastor Network, Arden? It's to create a community where they can open up and be safe, where they can come and receive teaching to strengthen them so they'll finish well.
Yeah. Because a lot of pastors do not have a safe place. They feel like, I remember hearing a story of a pastor, he would drive 8 hours just to go see a counselor because he did not want to be anywhere within his city, anywhere within his people, like letting his people know that he was having to go see a counselor because he felt like he needed to remain strong, show that he was strong. And so we want to create a safe place for you to be able to get that teaching, be able to be a part of Zoom calls every single month. We'll do that. But then ultimately, get a community around you. Get pastors that are around you that you'll be able to say, hey, I'm navigating this issue right now, and I'm trying to figure out how do I best like set up my team to win or something like that. And you'll have 5 pastors around the table say, oh, I navigated something similar to that. This is what we did, or this is what we did. And you'll have helpful insight, tools, and connection to be able to do those things that is going to come before you.
I love that, Arden. And now, so we're going to connect pastors, right? And then we're going to teach. We're going to bring things that have helped us to build a strong family, to build strong ministry, a lasting ministry. And we are also going to bring seasoned voices, men and women that have proven themselves over decades of ministry to be able to speak into our pastor friends that are listening to us.
I think the biggest thing that we want to focus in on is you finishing well, like longevity. That was always the thing. When we started talking about this, it wasn't, okay, we're going to help pastors create the best systems. Like, no, that's not what we're in the ministry for. We're not going to try to figure that out. There's some great organizations that are doing that. It wasn't, we're going to help them develop messages better. No, the thing we kept coming back to was we want to help them finish well. We want to create longevity. And so when we strategically talked about the voices that would be aligned within this project, it was all around longevity. Each one of those have navigated and gone through circumstances that are very unique. And we've had conversations with them that have talked about, transition, talked about going through hardship and miserable pain in your leadership and leading through that and coming ultimately into a better place, coming through a moral failure and being able to come back and navigate that really, really well. And so those are some of those voices that we want to bring on here so that you can ultimately finish well. You can do what God has placed on your heart to do, and you can do it for a long time.
All right. So all these leaders, and you know them all because we've talked to all of them. They've agreed to help us with this podcast. What do they all have in common? I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to see if your answer is the same as mine.
Oh, I just say years of experience.
Okay, but what gave them that years of experience? What's the secret sauce that gave them the ability to go decades without scandals?
So I would say it's the fear of God.
That's exactly what I say.
Yeah.
I see this in every one of these leaders. Not only do they have very, very healthy families and successful ministries, what's behind all of that is their absolute healthy fear of God. Now, this is what I believe. And the reason this burden for pastors really started is when God spoke to my heart and said, I want you to write the book on the awe of God. And that happened at the beginning of 2022. And as I started diving into the awe of God, I realized, well, actually, I'd been diving into it for 30 years.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But what I had discovered over that 30-year period is everyone in the Bible who finished well had a real healthy fear of God. If you look at King Saul is obeying God. He's actually hiding in the equipment. He doesn't even want the position. But he got to the point where he felt like his wisdom could supersede God's wisdom. And he started not obeying God out of the fear of the people he led. For centuries, our church fathers have taught the only thing that will set us free from the fear of man, and remember, the fear of man's a trap, is the healthy fear of God. Because we're going to serve whoever we fear. If we fear God, we're going to serve God. We're going to obey God. If we fear man, we're going to ultimately, even though we're the leader of a church, we're going to serve those men and women's desires.
Yeah.
And in all my travels, I've never seen an exception. If I meet a pastor who's more concerned about what his board's thinking, his elders are thinking, his church is thinking, I see a pastor who didn't endure. If I meet pastors who they respect what their board says, they're submitted to their board in the sense that if their board says, hey, this is out of line in your personal life, you need to change it, they change it. But they understood that nobody is going to pull me away from doing what is right in the eyes of God, right? This is what made Elijah strong until Jezebel came along. He was the one who didn't care what the king thought about him. The other prophets did. But I look in all my experience in traveling to these over 1,000 churches, pastors who feared God have endured. Pastors who don't fear God don't endure. And I found a scripture in Psalm 19, verse 9. This is, the fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. And I think about the healthy fear of God is what Jesus delighted in. Yeah. What gave him the ability to finish strong? I mean, resisting the temptation to give up to the point of sweating drops of blood. Mm-hmm. It was what he delighted in. And I find a lot of pastors, it's news to them when I say, what is it that Jesus delighted in? They don't know it was the fear of the Lord. Isaiah 11:3, pastor, go look at it. The spirit of wisdom was on him, the spirit of the Lord, the spirit of counsel, the spirit of knowledge, the spirit of understanding, spirit of might, and the spirit of the fear of the Lord. And it says his delight was in the fear of the Lord. And this is going to be a podcast where you're going to hear from men and women that have walked in that holy, healthy fear of God for years. Some pastors have larger churches. Other pastors have smaller churches. Because why? We're not looking at the size to be the indication of success. We're looking at, do they have longevity? Do they have scandals? Do they have children that love God? Do they have a spouse that loves God? All right. Have they obeyed their mission from heaven? Have they been able to do supernatural things because God spoke to them and they accomplished it? This is what we're looking for. We want these kind of leaders to speak into these pastors' lives. I'm excited about this, Arden.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hope you guys are excited about it. And I think a lot of people are going to be excited for this. And so if you're coming across this podcast, obviously it's a brand new podcast. So we want to get the word out about this. So please feel free to share it with your pastor friends. Share it with any pastors that are on your team that you think are going to get something from this. Because ultimately we want to see you finish well. And so we're going to engage in these conversations. We're bringing on people that are going to speak into different areas, and we believe that this is going to be a true blessing to you.
And so, Pastor, I just want to say this. We have resources that we make available to you absolutely at no charge. It's called Messenger X. It's actually an app. And just go to the App Store if you've got an iPhone. Go to Google Play if you've got an Android. Type in Messenger X. Don't put a space between the R and the X. And it will come up. Download it. Engage. You can use it for your small groups. You can use it for your team. We just want to be able to help strengthen you, not only through this podcast, but through this app that works very closely together with what we're going to be sharing on the podcast. So do we have anything else we want to say on this inaugural Healthy Pastor Co. podcast?
No, I think that's it. I mean, if you guys haven't already, please join the community, get involved.
Okay, how do they do that?
It is it's completely free community. You can find out more information about it by going to healthypastors.co, and you can join the community, sign up. There's just going to be an application.
Okay, let me make this clear because we might have some guys that are over 35 that are, okay. Healthypastors.co. So in other words, it's a website.
It's a website.
All right, healthypastors.co.
Yes,
all right.
And it's plural.
Yeah, because I know you're going to have a lot of guys out there that are really going to say, I want to be a part of this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So we'll have an application process. The application
explain that.
Is the only reason we do that is we want to make sure we're connecting you with other pastors. And so we don't want to just let any and everyone sign up. We want to make sure that you are actually a pastor or in some pastoral role. And so that way we're connecting you with other like-minded people.
Let's ask the other question that pastors are going to ask. Is there what's the cost going to be?
Yeah, it's completely free.
What?
Yes, it is completely free. We wrestled back and forth on this, trying to make sure that pastors would value it. And that's why we wanted at first to put a price tag on it. But we just believe that the resource that we are going to be doing through this is going to bring that value to the pastors, and that they will value it because they'll see the need behind it. And so we can't encourage you enough to sign up. So thank you guys so much for joining into this conversation. We hope it's been helpful. I hope it's whetting your appetite a little bit more for things that are going to come. We'll be releasing these every single month, and we'll see you next month.
All right. It's been a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healthy Pastor Podcast. If you're looking for a community of pastors to grow alongside with, we encourage you to join our Healthy Pastor community. You can apply by going to healthypastor.co. Before you go, make sure you subscribe and rate this podcast wherever you love to listen. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Healthy Pastor Podcast.